Greetings to all. Hello and welcome to the first American Craft Council Forum of the 2026, the State of Craft Collecting. My name is Jamie Ann Jacobin, Director of Development at the American Craft Council. If you are new to ACC, welcome. We are the largest long-standing craft organization in the United States, and you are attending one of our many programs celebrating American craft and upholding a future where objects matter, makers thrive, and craft connects. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge and give praise to the ACC staff. ACC is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where my colleagues are experiencing unimaginable situations in their communities right now. So despite the situation, they show up every day and find meaning in the work we do to represent our shared humanity through craft. So I hope all of us can take a moment to give thanks to our staff, and I would be happy to share any messages of courage, resilience, or hope that you want to leave for them in the chat. So thank you. Okay, well, in this program, we will be investigating trends in collecting craft in today's market. Throughout the presentation, we will be sharing statistics and resources both in the chat and in the presentation. We will hear from Doug Heller, veteran gallerist for over 50 years and co-owner of Heller Gallery. Suzanne Perrault, partner at Rago Wright Auctions, one of the leading auction houses in America for contemporary craft. Isobelle Bolt, a representative of Artsy, the largest online art marketplace, and ceramic artist Kenny Singh, a perfect example of an artist defining a new path to collectors. Each of these speakers will present 1 to 3 trends they have observed in recent years regarding craft collecting from their unique vantage points. And then we will have ample time for questions, answers, and conversation. To ask a question, please use the Q&A section of the menu, where you can also find closed captioning. So first, looking at our guests today, we had over 300 registrants, as I mentioned earlier on, with a wide range of perspectives. 92 of you by artwork, with most common way being from craft fairs, which of course we love at ACC. But only 58 of you consider yourself collectors, which is very interesting. 31% of you are makers or artists, 18% are craft curious, and 17% are craft professionals. So we thank all of you for being here. For anyone new to today's topic, I do want to center us on some vocabulary that you will hear throughout the talk so that we have a shared base of knowledge to learn from. So here are just some common terms. I should also mention that oftentimes art collecting seems like a very exclusive endeavor, but I use the term collector to describe anyone who prioritizes acquiring things that they care about. So in this situation, of course, that would be handmade items, whether artwork or functional homeware, but it would also apply to a child who collects specific rocks on their way home from school. In this definition, they would also be a collector. And so it is much more about aligning your values with what you surround yourself with. So with that, I'd like to invite Doug Heller to speak first about his perspective as a gallerist for over 50 years. Doug will introduce himself and then share his observations about recent trends in craft collecting. Doug?
Thank you very much, Jamian. I'm very pleased to be here today, and hello to all my fellow presenters. I'm going to speak about the gallery's history because I think to a great extent it mirrors the evolution of the field in general. The images that will be coming on the screen don't cover the entire history of the gallery, but rather show exhibitions that we had in our last space, which was in Chelsea, over a period of 10 years. The gallery began in 1974 with my first partner, Joshua Rosenblatt. It was a tiny 300 square foot space, but in a very significant neighborhood in New York City, which was part of the marketing plan. The idea of being on Madison Avenue on 68th Street, it put you in the context of the museum world in New York, near Museum Mile, near Sotheby's Park Bernay, near dozens of other uptown galleries. And it meant to people who were being introduced to you, even though you were a brand new face, you must have something that you're bringing to the table that's worth looking at. Over a period of almost a decade, we had a sequence of spaces in this area. We had four of them in total, and they all had a very uptown look. It was less similar to what you're seeing on the screen than one would think. It was more of a boutique situation. But there was something else happening in New York at the time, and that was happening downtown, and that was the contemporary art scene in Soho. And we were looking to align ourselves more with that. During the period that we were up on Madison Avenue, complementing our small space, we would do outside events. And interestingly enough, we would go to the antique shows because we felt that knowledgeable collectors were there. Jamian mentioned craft fairs earlier. New York didn't really have and still doesn't have any craft fairs in Manhattan that are notable. And that's what our goal was, to fill that void. But in order to do outreach, because we were literally operating in the dark ages, we were before the internet, we were before the personal computer. I mean, it was an entirely different world, which many of our young artists have a difficult time understanding, really. So it meant that if we were going to find collectors, as the expression goes, we had to go where the fish were. And the antique shows would bring in tens of thousands of people and put us in the context of fine antiques, with the idea being that what we showed had all of the qualities that would eventually keep them collectible, keep them desirable, and make them the antiques of the future, many people called us. So that was part of it. And then we also mounted large exhibitions. We managed to convince the people that managed Lever House, a landmark modernist building on Park Avenue, to give us their lobby, which was, as opposed to our 300 square feet, was 5,000 square feet. And we mounted a show working in cooperation with members of the Glass Art Society. We did this on two occasions. We called it Glass America. It was a group show covering a very broad range of what the field had to offer. And it elevated our presence in the community. Suddenly, we were something that was difficult to ignore. But really, downtown was where our heart was. And we managed to finally find a space on Green Street in Soho, and in a classic cast iron building, which had 2,800 square feet on the main floor and an equal amount of space downstairs for storage and private viewings. And we moved down there, and the context of what we showed changed a lot. Originally, we were in a small space, showing small objects, paperweights, goblets, hand-blown vessels, even Dick Marquis's marbles. And the price range in the early years was from $30 to about, at the absolute top, about $400. So things changed considerably after I viewed the exhibition that the Corning Museum had mounted in 1979, called New Glass 1979, a worldwide survey, which included artists working with glass artists and designers from 26 countries. And that literally for me was an epiphany. Up till then, we were just representing American makers, and they were doing interesting work, but from a very certain perspective, whereas the Europeans, such as Stanislav Lubensky and Yaroslava Brichtova, were academic artists and producing sculptures at a scale that were hundreds of pounds already. So we then moved into a different range, more sculptural, more installation work. And then we also started to do fairs and leave behind the antique shows. We started to do the sofa show, Sculptures, Objects, Functional Art, that was organized in Chicago. And that gave us a chance to meet and encounter firsthand a national audience. In 4 days, you would meet generally 20,000 people or more. And this was a knowledgeable community that came there, people who saw themselves frequently as collectors. They were interested in engaging with each other. They knew many of the artists and what to expect at the shows. That was very successful, but that also was something that in my mind was restrictive. meaning that it was just the craft world, and we were still seeking a broader audience. And that broader audience was to be found in the fine art fairs. And we started to apply to the fairs rather diligently. And I should mention by this time, my original partner, due to ill health, was no longer part of the business. And my brother joined me, and he's still my partner today as we continue to work together. And we would apply to these fairs and often be very abruptly rebuffed with the explanation of, no, Doug, we like what you do, but this is not sofa. And we had to really campaign to convince them that we were part of the broader art community. And I know that some of these questions of the impact on how your work is perceived will come up further in our conversations today. Fine art versus the craft world, all of that makes a difference. It makes a difference in who will give serious consideration to what you're doing, and it impacts on the market as well. So after a while, we were doing Art Miami, Art Palm Beach, shows as far away as Seattle, and it was a whole different ballgame. And in the course of a year, I estimated we would literally engage face to face well over 100,000 people. And it was quite an experience. So at the height of what we were doing, we had our home space, and we would do 4 or 5 fairs a year. Now, I mentioned we were in Soho, but the shift in the art market happened in New York, and suddenly Soho became like Madison Avenue, and it became a carriage trade boutique area, and the galleries were fleeing in droves. And we started to also say it's time for us to leave. We next moved to what became our greatest space that was in the meatpacking district. I don't know if anyone here has ever visited there, but when we first joined them in the meatpacking district, it was more than just a word. Every day you would see butchers with blood-stained aprons walking through the streets and trucks delivering whole animals that were going to be taken apart later. But it was a dynamic area, and part of what we were hoping to do was keep our collectors engaged with the idea that they are visiting and participating in an adventure. It's not just going shopping. It's going and involving themselves in an immersive experience. The space we had there was a former meatpacking plant that had been converted by the landlords. We had 6,000 square feet, beautifully renovated, and we did shows similar to what you're seeing here. And a single focused exhibition could perhaps encompass the entire 3,000 feet on one floor. And the shows were in every way museum worthy. And as I mentioned museums, I want to say that from the very beginning of the business, museums were a target audience for us. Growing up, it was a very important part of my life experience, and to think that we could contribute and give back to the museum community was fascinating. So even in the early days, by the time we hit 1980, we had sold work to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to the Museum of Modern Art, to the Cooper Hewitt, to the then Museum of American Craft in New York. And it's something we have continued over the years. We closed our last space, which was the Chelsea space, a 3,000 square foot space that is where these photographs were taken. We closed that about a year and a half ago. And like many smaller and mid-sized galleries, we have just found that the game has changed. The expense of doing what we were doing. I mean, at one point, between the shows and our gallery rent, we were paying over $400,000 a year rent, which when you're selling pieces that are only in the several thousands of dollars is quite a challenge. So we gave up the space, and now Michael and I continue to work, but we're doing it in temporary exhibitions. We had a solo show for Tutsinski in what's called the Curator Lab. We've curated and mounted exhibitions now at Urban Glass, the nonprofit gallery studio complex in Brooklyn. And we see that this is something that's viable, and we intend to continue it. So in a nutshell, that's what Heller Gallery has done. And I think the growth of what we witnessed, is very much parallel to the growth in the field in general. If you were to, yeah, and do you want me to mention some of the trends that I see going on, or should we save that for the other part of the conversation?
Well, you've had a lot of insights about those trends, but let's go ahead and indeed save them until the end, because I think your perspective is really valuable in this. So thank you so much.
You were very
Um,
well.
and of course, a lot of your experience, I think, is going to come across as we continue on, because I think the work you are doing really does mimic what we have been seeing and that lead up to where craft collecting is going. So with that, I'd like to invite Suzanne Perrault, who will talk about her perspective from the secondary market. But first, I wanted to share this very interesting statistic that was just published in December by Art Tactic. Of course, I mean, this number pertains to many objects beyond the realm of craft. But as we see auction houses embracing user-friendly technologies, including places like Rago, who, in my opinion, has really taken the lead in making auctions more accessible and transparent online, I foresee opportunities for auction houses continuing to grow. So, Suzanne, thank you for being with us and making auctions just a little bit more accessible through your online platform and also through your information today. Suzanne.
And can you hear me now? And thank you. It's always it's a big honor to be here with all of you. And so I have been involved in the craft market since I joined Rago Auctions in the mid 1980s. And everything that was being sold at Rago's, which started in 1984, was in the arts and crafts movement. So for many years, all the auctions covered only the arts and crafts movement. And starting in the early 1990s, we expanded and started selling things that were more modern design, contemporary design. And that seems to be always hand in hand with studio craft. There were articles being written in the ACC's Craft Horizon as early as, I believe, the 1940s about exactly that. So we're doing then modern design with contemporary craft. And because of where our office is located, it has moved a little bit through the years, but we're always in the same area. We are exactly between New York and Philadelphia. And we're right on the Delaware River, right on the edge of Bucks County. All of that area has been a hotbed of craft making since the Second World War. In Lambertville, where we are now, where I am today, we had one of the studios for Paul Evans. Paul Evans also had the furniture maker, also had a place in New Hope right across, as did Phil Powell, who you see here on the photograph, and Nakashima, who has been there for decades and is still operating. There were many other makers in the area as well, doing fine crafts. So as we are in the 90s, expanding from arts and crafts movement to contemporary crafts and modern design, because of where we were located, when we were offered one piece or an entire collection of works in modernism, we very often would be offered these pieces by all of these makers. So sort of as a de facto, because of dumb luck, because of where we were located, we became sort of known for selling fine studio crafts. So the trends that are observed and in craft collecting and buying was one of the major questions that was asked. So as far as I'm concerned, from my very myopic view here, craft is definitely having a serious moment. And I would think that if everybody didn't think that craft was having a serious moment, we wouldn't all be here today. So it's a popular stance. And I think that craft is having a serious moment for two specific reasons, the way I see it. One of them is critical mass, and the other one has to do with contextualizing. So the critical mass is because basically, there are many original craft collectors who have been collecting for 40, 50 years. They have been moving to, either they have less room to put things in, but they have often been moving to smaller quarters and divesting of some of their holdings. So because they are having, they are selling a lot of their collection, those pieces are coming out on the market, and they've been coming out for some time. This isn't exactly new. It's at least 10 years and probably a little bit more. But because of that, we are able to offer on a regular basis nice groupings of sort of, I guess you could call them fresh to the secondary market. We are selling collections of works that are vintage. We try to make them look nice. We put enough of them. So all of this sort of creates, it's like a theatrical event. It creates drama, and there's enough for people to see and pay attention to. If you sell one piece in one auction, I don't think you have as good a chance of getting a great, sort of a great result as if you sell a bunch of it. So we sell a bunch of it many times. So at least 3 times a year at Rago's, we sell contemporary crafts now. So that's one thing. Another thing is that when you sell either a particularly good grouping of crafts, whether it is because you're having a great auction and you have many consigners and it is particularly fine, or if you have a single owner collection, which really sparks a lot more, then you are likely to get more, definitely sort of more excitement from your current collectors. But you can also, if you do a good enough job, and if the property is good enough, you can also be building brand new collectors of any age, but people who were not necessarily looking to crafts in the past. So this is why I have this slide here. In 2023, we were offered many works in turned wood from the Stephen Weinroth collection. He had just passed away. We had been selling turned wood for many years, since the very first modern auction we had done, the modern design auction. We would sell them, but we would sell very few pieces by very few makers. So the Moulthrops, all 3 generations, or Stocksdale, or Ellsworth, but a few pieces here and there. Now, all of a sudden, we are offered this gigantic collection by all sorts of makers, most of whom I've never heard of. They don't have secondary market to speak of. And it was either, well, you're just going to jump in this and try to make a market and see what happens, or you just sort of pull away. And my first gut was to pull away, because I thought, how can we do this? No one is really buying these artists' works. But a friend who is a wood turner and a fine craftsman and a furniture maker, Mark Spheri, said, no, there's enough good stuff in here. This is qualitative. Take the chance. Let's try to do this. So we were able to do that. And because it was new and fresh and exciting, because we were able to take what we wanted and refuse what we didn't, and we were able to price as we best saw fit, which was picking it out of the air, it went really well. And so we were able to attract the current, which unknown to me, current bidders and collectors in turned wood, but also we have been turning people on, as it were, to this particular field, because we're doing enough of them now. We have done 5 or 6, either just turned wood auctions or part of craft auctions, and so people who are now sort of like looking at this, like, perhaps this is something interesting. Doesn't take that much room. Very often, it's not a ton of money, so why not sort of try to get a small collection going? So that's one. My second point is about the craft profile, and how the prices are also raised when you are contextualizing craft with fine art in international settings. So for this, I mean, when Bob Ellison made a promised gift to the Met, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, for ceramics of the last 125 years. And they accepted that. They gave him a beautiful, beautiful show. I don't know if you saw that. This was several years ago at in the American Wing. And they gave him a lot of real estate. They floated his works on sort of, it was like glass carpets. It looked so gorgeous. So a lot of real estate, they kept it there for many, many years. So that means that if you were coming from anywhere on the planet and you were looking at fine art works through the Met, you would see his collection and you would notice, you couldn't help but not, you would notice how much time, space, and resources the Met had decided to put in this particular show. And you could not help but think, so then obviously this is quite important. The prices have risen since then. As people are seeing some of these makers, like George Orr, the ceramicist from the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, they would see the most phenomenal examples in this particular show and then decide to start buying that as well. In the same sort of philosophy, the weavers Ruth Asawa, for example, getting a major retrospective both at San Francisco MoMA and New York MoMA. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a fantastic show. So doing that really raised the prices of her work, leading to and then after. Olga de Amaral, another weaver, got a retrospective at the Fondation Cartier in Paris, and that, of course, also has been helping. Not that she needs that much help, but those prices are now completely through the roof. Toshiko Takaezu's is the first exhibition you see at the brand new Princeton University Museum. Her ceramics are surrounded by fine art of the time, and that they are bringing you right there. That is the first thing you see in this brand new museum. So fine art galleries are also having the same effect on putting craft and fine arts together. A lot of the fine art galleries are representing these artists more and more. David Zwirner, for example, doing a show at TIFAF a few years back with George Orr in conjunction with the paintings of Giorgio Morandi. That's all there was in his corner booth, and it looked really great. And again, that very much helped the market for George Orr. I don't know that Morandi needed any help. As you saw, the previous slide was a fair photograph of a Michael Rosenfeld booth at Fog Design, and those ceramics were, her pieces were done the Falkenstein metal and glass, as you could see on the tables there, shown with paintings by many artists, including Elaine de Kooning and Lee Krasner. So those prices, of course, also go up. Falkenstein has been doing incredibly well, leading to, during, and after. At auction, as you could see, also showing how these prices, the Falkenstein, it is all sort of together, and people are seeing these craftspeople being shown with fine art, and it really creates a lot of buzz and drama. So at auction, next slide, please, when we are showing at Rago some large collections of crafts, we are also sometimes doing that with their fine art. If we get to do a single owner collection like that, like the Wind collection, which we did, was a $2 million collection for us, it was a great success. As my husband David would say, $2 million is just a bad paintings for Christie's, but that's all right. So when we are showing fine art works like Pomodoro or a very large Louise Nevelson or Marc de Suvero, for example, in conjunction with the rest of their craft, which were Chihuly or Volkos or Bennett Bean, all of the crafts ended up bringing so much more money, and we broke these crazy records. So I think that the COVID lockdown and sort of a new inclusive, expansive look at many different media that are now acceptable art forms, coupled with, as I said, the regular supply and demand for qualitative material, all of that is contributing to the craft's resurgent popularity and some robust prices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And I should mention we are putting resources for people in the chat about how to learn more about our speakers. So both Heller Gallery and Rago so far. Um, I am now happy to invite Isobelle from Artsy. If you're not familiar with Artsy, of course, I highly suggest you look them up. I often look to them as our leader in sharing trends and statistics about collecting craft. So we are so happy to have Isobelle here to speak with us, and specifically will enjoy her talk as a fellow craft appreciator. So Isobelle.
Thanks so much. And it was wonderful to listen to Douglas and Suzanne's perspectives. For those of you who aren't familiar, Artsy is the largest and fastest growing art marketplace in the world. I would recommend downloading the app because it can help you discover a lot of new artists. And depending on your taste, depending on what you're interested in, the algorithm will surface things that are more tailored to your taste. So the more things you look at, the more things you save. Using the Discover Daily feature, which surfaces new artworks for you to look at each day, you can discover new makers and artists that you've never seen before. So it's really fantastic. In terms of our scope, we have 3.7 million registered users across the world. It's an American HQ company, but very much global. We have kind of, 2 million sessions with commercial intent, um, every year. And then in terms of how many followers we have across social media, it's 5 million. Every month, we'd get 2.4 million active visitors, 20,000 new art enthusiasts joining Artsy, and 1,000 new collectors making their first purchase. Next slide. In terms of trends, so I'm going to start off just talking about more general trends and then move into craft. So we publish several reports every year. We conduct surveys. We use data that we have available to us on the platform. And so this data is taken from real collectors and real sellers who are, transacting on Artsy or not. And so what we found is that digital sales channels remain crucial for meeting next generation collectors. 71% of collectors under 37 bought art online in 2024. There's been a 30% increase in first-time buyers on Artsy in 2025. And it's become increasingly common for sellers to use online platforms. So 76% of galleries offered works online in 2024. What we've seen in the past year is that price sensitivity, for market reasons, has led to a surge in interest in smaller works and works by emerging artists and works that are both. So 61% of collectors today have a budget of under 5,000, I mean, myself included. 40% of Artsy purchases in 2025 were under 40 inches, and 72% of collectors say that they are most interested in collecting emerging artists. And so I would say that is where craft comes in, and I would say this is one contributing factor to the surge among many, the surge that we're seeing in interest in craft. If you go to the next slide. So we're actually seeing growing buyer interest in craft medium types on Artsy. Just some examples that I've pulled, 114% increase in purchases listed as embroidery, 97% increase in purchases listed as tapestry, 54% increase in purchases listed as textiles, and that's year over year, so from 2024 to 2025. Last month, the following words were in our top 200 search terms: glass, ceramic, tapestry, and textile. So what's interesting to me there is in those 200 search terms, you have a lot of people coming who are saying Banksy, Warhol. They're looking for the artists that they recognize. And so to have these words that are more craft related appearing highly, I think is really testament to that surge in interest. One thing that Artsy is, I would say, known for is our editorial and the kind of online curation that we do, and we champion emerging artists. So we have a feature that we run every year called the Artsy Vanguard, and this Vanguard, this edition, we selected 10 artists, and these are emerging artists that we think are going to be the next big thing. And so I was really happy to see this time around that 3 of the 10 artists work in traditional craft mediums, and that was really exciting. So we have Elise Perrault here, who, as you can see, is using a loom to create these fantastic pieces. And what I found really interesting is she says she doesn't have a background in painting or the visual arts at all, but there are 2 important figures in her family, her mother, who's a highly skilled seamstress, and her grandmother, who was an illuminator and a calligrapher. So she is tapping into a heritage, and I think that is what many of us are very attracted to craft for. It's a tradition that's been passed down. And so this is someone in the fine art sphere now, but who is tapping into those practices and bringing more awareness to them. She's had a 292% increase in followers in the past year, which is incredible to see. Another artist, so this is Heidi Lau. I was lucky enough to see the installation that you can see in the video in person in Hong Kong in September, and it is really stunning. So she is using ceramics, and she's essentially doing a kind of unconventional spin on the traditional medium, which has a rich history in China, and combining it with mythology, folklore, robots. And so her practice is really interesting. And I like what she's saying here about giving a physical form to something that didn't previously exist. How lovely is that? So she feels like there's an energy that you impart onto an object when you make it, which is something that she never really felt or experienced with printed material. She's had an 85% increase in followers in the last year. And then finally, we have Sayan Shanda, again, working with textiles, but also with ceramics, although they're not shown here. These works again tap into heritage. So he's working with kantha, which is traditional quilting. And so he's saying he goes back and forth with the idea of ownership. He's working with kantha and conversing with makers whom he would never know. It's like a matrilineal tradition that's passed on from woman to woman. And so he's saying he's, having conversations by continuing the work with women from more than 50 years ago. And these strips have their own stories. So I think it's really wonderful to see in the, in more traditional fine art spaces, more of a focus on mediums like this. He's had a 766% increase in followers, but I would suggest that that's probably because he didn't start out with that many, but let's celebrate it anyway. So yeah, that was that. And just I'll talk more about this as we get into the kind of panel part of this, but really like the new generation of buyers are more and more interested in lesser known artists, emerging artists, and traditional mediums, and it's really exciting to see.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. It is exciting, and you give us hope. Well, here's another little statistic, just in case you guys didn't get enough. Art Basel and UBS teamed up to do a survey, which they just published this fall. And so they were reporting that 63% of collectors are actually now buying directly from artists. So Kenny Singh, of course, is a great example doing just this with almost 36,000 followers on Instagram. Actually, Kenny, I recently watched your recent online art sale, and I made note that you were almost completely sold out in 2 hours. So I look forward to hearing what you have to share with us. And I know it'll be a little bit more about your practical observations and how you personally are seeing certain trends in your sphere.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Kenny Singh. I am a ceramic artist, and I have been making pottery for well over 20 years now, and seriously selling my work for almost 10 years. Things picked up a little bit more during the pandemic, as it did for a lot of ceramic artists doing direct-to-consumer, online-only sales. And I kind of followed in a lot of people's footsteps. But because I had started an online community back in around 2015, I had quite a good following that I was able to leverage to market and sell my work to. So as as she mentioned, my online following is mostly on Instagram. I have a following of around, I'm only giving these numbers to give kind of perspective to people to understand where some of these sales are coming from, which I'll talk about later in some of my slides. But I have around 75,000 followers on YouTube, 36,000 followers on TikTok, actually, and 250 plus thousand followers on Instagram. So I only say that because it's harder to do this with like zero following online, right? And as Isobelle mentioned, a lot of these artists are growing very rapidly over the course of the last couple of years. But that growth really was seen for ceramic artists, at least, more before the pandemic. So this was kind of like in the 2015 to 17 range. Ceramics was like hot on social media, and I think that was because largely in part artists like myself, where we're showing a lot of our process. We're not just showing kind of an end result, which is what you see mostly in a gallery setting, or even something like Artsy. And Isobelle showed a lot of videos of like artists making the work, right? And that is kind of how you start to fall in love with the process, and you start to like really appreciate how something is made, more than I think historically. And I think that is largely in part because of something like social media and YouTube, Instagram, where it's very easy to show work like that. So I'm going to have you go back one more slide. I just want to make a really quick note on some trends here. So my work has evolved over the years from larger centerpiece style work. So you're seeing like the larger bowls here, vases, to more, as we saw in the last couple slides, was like smaller work, more functional work, and people having that budget under $5,000. And so my work has started off much more in like quote unquote fine art world, where you're buying something that is more in like $1,000 plus range, centerpiece style type statement piece, to something that is a lot more accessible to someone that is buying online, that doesn't actually get to hold the piece in their hands or see it with their own eyes. Making those decisions to buy is much harder in those contexts. And so that budget is lower. People want to be very familiar with what they're buying. For example, a mug, versus saying, hey, this is a large bowl, and not really understanding what is the scale of this, what is the material, what does it look like in person, what does it feel like in person. So my work is heavily weighted towards more functional wear. So there's just a little bit of context to some of the stats I'll be sharing. We can kind of breeze through this, but these are the 4 points that I'll be talking about today: building a following, creating scarcity and hype, a little bit about marketing for a direct-to-consumer artist like myself, and then the idea of establishing keystone products for yourself as an artist. So for me, as someone that is relying on people to follow me and new eyes on my work every single day, I have to think about the content that I'm posting with the idea of, why would someone follow me, right? A lot of times people aren't buying from an artist the first time they see them, right? They're kind of investing in that artist's journey, and they're following, or they're buying because they followed this person. That's a blanket statement, but it's a generalization. And so the idea behind literally everything that I post is it has to be some sort of hook, right? I'm introducing new projects. I'm talking about projects that are halfway through an R&D process. And you want to share some of this work, even if it's not fully thought through, or maybe it's a failed attempt at an idea that you had. And I mentioned here in this slide that a little bit of mystery goes a long way, right? You don't want to give it all away. You want to be kind of a magician online, to get people to kind of like lock into your work and follow you. Next slide. And then the next thing that you want to really think about is consistency. I think artists of the past did a really great job of, despite artists having like certain periods, you want to create consistency, right? Like there's so much noise on the internet these days, that when you go to someone's work or their profile and you see that they're just kind of making a very eclectic collection of work and it's kind of all over the place, you may like that. But in general, people want to they want you to meet their expectations. And so when you can portray consistency in your work, or in the type of work, or in the way that you're editing work and portraying it on the internet, in my personal opinion, it really helps someone click that follow button, so that they know, like, hey, I'm investing my time to actually follow this person. I know that they're going to fill up the noise on my social feeds. I don't want to be surprised by what they're posting. I want them to meet my expectations. And a little stat here that we say in the ceramic world, at least, is that videos help you gain new followers that could potentially turn into collectors or buyers, and still images are what help attract buyers. And so there's, having that balance, kind of speaking to the artists out there trying to sell their work, is that you can't only post photos, or you can't only post videos, if you want to hit, the largest set of demographic that you have on the internet. So the next thing is, how do we engage with people online when you're just behind a screen, right? And there's lots of ways that social media platforms have allowed you to speak to your audience, whether or not that's through, kind of like face-to-face, like pre-recordings, talking to the audience, or little widgets and things like that you can post in your stories or in your content that allow people to engage with the work. I use this method a lot in my work because it really is the only way for me to connect with my audience outside of direct messages, which is like pretty unscaled. It's hard to manage when you have a lot of followers. So what I like to do is, with any project, is try to think of a way to, how do I get people invested in the work, whether or not they're going to buy, right? If they're not going to buy, how do I get them invested so that they keep following? If they are going to buy, how do I get them invested so that they do purchase when I do launch those products? And so this is just a screenshot of something that I've done in the past, where I'm trying to design a new product or form, and I'll literally just ask, like, hey, what are your favorites, right? And kind of number these, and then you get a ton of engagement. And then people really want to just see the results of that, to see where did they fall. Did I vote with the majority? Did I vote with the minority? And either way, I promise you, people feel special whether or not they're in the minority or the majority of those statistics. It helps them feel like they have a stake in the game. And then really what this all comes down to is, do you deliver, right? Are you actually giving people what they want throughout? Again, like the magician reference, right? Is there like the aha moment? And you don't want to just give one of those aha moments throughout this process. You want to talk about, checkpoints along the way. It's kind of like chapters in a book. If books had no chapters, it would be kind of tough to digest, right? And so you want to, or what I do is, I like to show kind of the small wins and even some of the failures throughout the process. So this is just an example of something I would post online, where I say, hey, I'm really happy with how this prototype turned out, right? This isn't the final product, but just giving people kind of like, oh, I followed along and he either succeeded or failed. And that's just kind of a nice win for people. And so in the context of building hype and loyalty, this is kind of like, there's some blurred lines between online marketing and also building hype. It's kind of one and the same in a lot of the ways, but you want to bring people along for the ride. And I mentioned this kind of already, but you want to, people want to invest in the journey. So for example, my most popular product of last year was something that I actually started almost a year prior, and I shared progress of that for almost a year. And I got people very, very invested in that. They saw the failures, they saw the research and development, they saw the materials that I was using, the technology that I was using, the hardware. And so the idea with that, and the way that I project my work online, is that I want to try to hit like all types of people, makers themselves, collectors, techie people. I don't want to define techie and artsy people, but there's just lots of different reasons people are online looking at art. And so I have so many people, sorry, back one more slide. Just like a message like this, which is just like, I hope I can support your business soon. This isn't a person saying, I want to buy this thing. It's just someone that is saying like, hey, I really enjoyed coming along with you for this journey. I'm not going to buy this, or maybe I don't have the budget right now to buy what you're working on, but like, I'm going to follow you. And I hope that at one point in the future, I can support you. And to me, this is like the ultimate win, whether or not they buy, right? This is someone that is like probably going to follow me for the rest of time. And then establishing collections. I think that this nods a little bit more towards the demographic of people that my fellow panelists have talked about today. Right, like I want to, being someone that's selling online, it's very easy for someone to just buy from you once and never come back. Especially if you're someone that's making the same thing over and over again. For me, I look at trends and what is selling well, and how and creating variations of those things, or creating things that are within a collection, or saying, hey, this is the 2024 version of this thing, this is the 2025 version of this thing, this is the 2026 version of these things, and you can never get those earlier versions unless you buy this year, unless potentially they emerge in many years, maybe after I'm long gone. But the idea is that you're creating a reason for people to come back, and that's oftentimes done in selling something as a collection, or kind of in the same vein of work. And so a stat here is that 30% of my sales in 2025 were from repeat customers. So those are people coming back. And for me, I don't make the same thing over and over again. I'm making things, again, kind of in that same vein. But this is proof that people want to come back and buy something if you kind of stay with that consistency. And then creating scarcity. I kind of already talked about this, of like, hey, you can only get this if you buy right now, or you can only get this if you buy this year. It's going to sell out, right? This is something that is sometimes real and sometimes perceived, right? I can say, hey, there's only going to be 100 of these things. And it's like, I choose to only make 100, right? Or I can say like, hey, this is only going to be available in this color for the first month, or whatever, right? There's so many different ways that you can create scarcity. And when buyers, at least from just messages that I've had from people, when they know that they kind of have to act fast, there is this kind of increased urgency. And there's the frustration that comes with that of, hey, like I didn't get what I wanted. Are you ever going to make this again? And that is really hard to answer when the answer is no, or sorry. But for those people that do get in there and get to buy something, or, it's like, again, like winning an auction, like being the lead bidder, like you're invested in that process, and you kind of like, it's kind of fun, right? To try to like be part of that hype. And so J-Man mentioned that I sell out quite fast, and I intend to sell out because it creates a bit of scarcity and hype. But 95% of my sales occur within the first 10 minutes of a sale. And so this was a story that I posted at the end of last year, where I said, if you had ordered something from this collection in the first 60 seconds, so if you had bought in the first 60 seconds, sorry, if you ordered 1 minute after the sale started, 200 items had already sold. So you may have been someone that wanted something that sold out, and you got something else. But creating that hype, for me at least, versus doing like, hey, I always have stuff in stock on my website, is what has, I think, led to a lot of success for myself. And then I'll just talk really quickly about marketing. I've talked about that a lot in the past slides, but about half of my website traffic is coming from social media. The other half is potentially coming from other sources of social media that aren't being tracked, or organic searches on the internet, or again, word of mouth. But I think it's really important for me to look at this stat and say, I need to invest in posting on social media and bringing people along for that journey, because half of my traffic is coming from social media. Not sales necessarily, but traffic. And then email marketing. This is something that I think is, for a lot of younger artists, or newer, I want to say newer, greener artists, something that they feel like, is annoying. Like, we all hate getting 1,000 emails a day. And sometimes it can feel like spam. I give people a reason to follow my email list, just because social media could fall off the face of the earth tomorrow. And it's unlikely, but I could lose all those followers in an instant. And if I don't have an email list, I'm down to zero, right? I'm starting from scratch, which is really, really hard. So I like to give people a reason to follow me, or subscribe to my email marketing list. and I use different strategies for that. Sometimes they'll say, hey, you can only access the sale if you're an email subscriber, or hey, you're going to get a little bit more information about the sale via email, such as like, these are the inventory amounts for each product, or this is going to be available for pre-sale, or made to order orders if something does sell out, or these items, if they sell out, they're gone forever. And so these numbers may not mean much to people in this room, but when I send out an email, on average, 58% of people that get that email open it, and 4% of total receivers of that email end up buying something. So that number might sound really small, but let's say you have 1,000, you send out 1,000 emails and 4% buy, for clicking a button and sending out an email, that's pretty good conversion rate. And keystone products. So I would suggest to everybody having something that is very recognizably yours. This is very hard to do. And I am very fortunate that I've been able to create products like this for myself. But this is a product that basically you can reliably produce, right? This isn't something where if somebody buys it or orders it, you're like, oh my gosh, I hope I can make this, right? This is something that needs to be very reliably produced. Something that you can sell before you've actually made it. And so for me, 30% of my sales, or 37% of my sales, were pre-orders last year, which accounted for 50% of my sales. So being confident in something that you can make that can potentially go viral online. Again, this is not easy to do, but something that really, really works for me and that I rely on.
Well, thank you so much, Kenny. I think this has all been really insightful. We are running over time, but I think that the conversation we are going to have is really valuable. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to have a conversation. If people need to go, we understand. Suzanne, I know you have auctions going on currently, so if you also need to step out, we understand. And by the way, those auctions are in the chat for everyone to learn from. So with that, I'd like, Jenna, maybe you can pin all of us or add all of us. Great. Thank you to the screen. And Kenny, I think it was so important to have your perspective, specifically because I feel like the work you were doing is building the next generation of collectors who then may go on and buy something from Heller, Rago, are learning and browsing on Artsy and finding work there. But I think what's really interesting is a lot of the things you were speaking about in terms of engaging your audience and keeping them captivated is very much within the traditional model of patronage, which so many collectors who I speak to right now think is completely dead. So I'm wondering if everybody here could talk a little bit about their perspective about contemporary patronage of artists and what that looks like.
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, how impressed I was with Kenny's presentation and how, as you just noted, he takes things that are traditionally part of the desire from the collecting market, from the patrons' perspective, to know the artist, to make a studio visit, and suddenly you're being able to do that with tens upon tens of thousands of people all at once. I think that was wonderful. I'm very curious, how many people do you work with on this? Are you a sole practitioner, or do you have a staff of 5, 10? Because obviously this is not something I don't think one person can possibly be doing on their own.
Well, I have a full-time job as a graphic designer, so I do that full-time. And then I run Turn Studio on the side all by myself. So I don't want to get too far from the question, but yeah, so running from creating, marketing, and selling and packaging and shipping is all done on my own.
That is more than impressive.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about patronage, yeah, I mean, there's so many. Again, I'm engaging with my followers just in direct message quite often, and so many people don't buy my work. Right, I have hundreds of thousands of followers. Obviously, I'm not doing hundreds of thousands of sales per day, and so a lot of those people just want to follow, and sometimes they say, "Hey, one day I want to buy your work. You saw that message in the screenshot there." And those are people that maybe they don't need a mug or they don't need a vase, right? They're just someone that has appreciated following my work and they want me to keep making the work. And so there's a lot of education in my content of, hey, this is how I'm doing this, or this is how you can do this if you're doing it on your own. So I think that a lot of people or patrons are investing in artists because they know that they're getting value out of that person's content, which is a little bit different than traditional patronage where you're potentially, you just like love the arts and you want to support this artist because of what they create. Maybe because you have lots of money, or maybe because you want to potentially buy something from them in the future. For me, I think that with content creators like myself, people just want to be entertained and learn something here and there. And if they can, they'll buy a $50 mug or $100 mug, or it really doesn't matter. They just want to support people that they follow. And I've found that for me, sales took off once I started sharing more about myself and some of my personal life here and there, and of course my process. And for me, sharing the losses and how hard something is to make is why people invest in the work, right? At the end of the day, what I'm making is something that you could probably go to Target and buy for $3. Sometimes it's literally, someone will send me something. Oh, I just found this thing that looks exactly like what you made, and it was $8. People aren't buying it because, of what it is sometimes. A lot of times they're buying it because of who made it and how they made it.
Yeah. There was a question in the Q&A about advice for emerging artists. And Doug, that was specifically a question for you, but I think it's a question that actually many of us could answer here. So would you like to start by answering that, Doug?
Well, I think, again, I'll turn to Kenny's presentation. He's done a brilliant job on telling people what they can do. And a lot of what he's done has paralleled what we were doing, in an older fashioned way in the gallery, which was community building, trying to draw connections so people are invested in what they're seeing. We had many people over the years who were consistently visiting the gallery, looking at the gallery, and never collectors. We would call them our glass lovers, and they were an important component of the community. For an artist to build a career, it takes a great many things. But I think Kenny, in the most succinct and effective way, demonstrated in today's world what people can do. The gallery model it runs parallel, but it's quite different, and the impulse when somebody feels excitement that they can buy something. I don't know your price range, but we sometimes have the same thing when we send out an e-blast. If it's going to attract somebody, we would be offering one piece or one artist's work. If it's going to be successful, it usually happens quickly. You get that response, and the competitive aspect in that is always something that people find stimulating, and that's the idea of a limited number. In our case, almost everything that we've ever offered has been unique. So, you can collect a particular artist, but you're not going to get a second chance until Suzanne brings it to the auction world. And that's one of the things that's exciting about what's happening now, is that many people who missed an opportunity, or in some cases couldn't afford to avail themselves of it at that time, are now finding it's come back to them. And that's a very exciting thing. So I don't know if I'm addressing, what an artist starting out should do. I mean, you have to have good images of your work. You have to have a thick skin and be able to absorb rejection without taking it personally and letting it crush you. You have to know how, as the gallerists do, you have to know how to network and build relationships and be persistent with it. And you have to, I think, most importantly, have an original voice, because there are so many people that you're competing with. And, and I'll say it for a collector too. What should a new collector be looking at? They should be researching on what they're looking at, the primary source of the creative impulse, or is it a tertiary copy of something? So, well, I yield the floor.
Yeah. Does anyone have Suzanne?
This is a sort of a mashup of the last two questions. I have been, because of my very small group of what I do that now, contemporary glass and turned wood, right, which is a two small fields in the greater spectrum. Because many galleries are no longer there or no longer representing artists' works. We, as an auction house, have become the primary market to a few, not many, but a few artists, which is, I think, it's a little fraught and it's pretty fascinating. And I feel like I am holding baby birds in my hands because they are likely used to dealing with someone like Doug and Katya. And the prices have been going up in galleries, especially in this country. We are known to ask significantly more for crafts in this country than, say, if you go to Europe or Japan. And I think that sometimes the collectors will go to other countries to get a better deal. But if, as a maker, you are used to being able to ask for a certain amount, and you come to us as an auction house, it's a big part of the management here is to let them understand that we sort of have to take this several clicks down, that because the model for an auction is to get estimates that are really sort of approachable, seductive for people to start. You start low, and then they will hopefully bid it up and compete. But you need to attract them in the first place. And if you start too high, they will not bid at all, and the things will fall flat. In a gallery such as Heller, the whole process is that you start higher, and there is no such urgency. Our auction is on a specific date at a specific time, and if it doesn't sell, it is done. In a gallery, you have more time, so you can show pieces in a beautiful setting for many weeks, and kind of wait until they sell, and you can negotiate a little, and so you go from higher to lower, and we are trying to go from lower to higher. But so handling, my whole point being handling artists is delicate, and I feel you, Doug and Katya. I feel what you're doing.
Well, that's interesting, Suzanne, because I also think when I hear what can emerging artists do, and it's funny because I hear Kenny like using some I don't know, maybe information and tactics from galleries, but also from the auctions by having that art drop, which actually should have been one of our terms at the beginning, which is just really like a timely online art sale. Like you kind of have to use all these tactics. But thinking of the emerging artist and how they can use those tactics, I wonder how that translates to an emerging collector and maybe how they get their feet wet in collecting. And Isobelle, you talked about maybe galleries having, lower priced or smaller work so they can go from Kenny's very approachable object to something, maybe a little more substantial to grow their collection so that they can make it to the gallery. So what would be your advice then for an emerging collector?
I love this question. I think about it a lot because actually I work for a company of art enthusiasts who are themselves emerging collectors, and so we often will talk about this, and we see the trends on Artsy as well. And I would say, really, I think it can be intimidating, and there's often this kind of doubt in your mind of like, I don't need this, because you're so used to buying things maybe that you need versus things that you just find beautiful and simply want. And I think something that really helped me to get started was to actually engage with the artists and have those conversations and get to know who they were and get to know the story. And so it's the other side of the coin of what Kenny was saying, which I think it's so important to just allow yourself the opportunity to connect with something on a level that's more than visual. And so that could be reading up about the artist, watching some content the artist has produced. If you're at a gallery, talking to the gallerist about the artist they'd love to tell you. And I think it really, a lot of it starts in that conversation. And so it may seem contradictory where I'm coming from a place of selling online where you can just buy with your credit card without talking to anyone. But a huge part of online sales is also storytelling. So I'm encouraging galleries to tell the story of the artist and their work on the listing so that people have that opportunity to fall in love and to get that story. If someone's inquiring, I'm encouraging the seller to have a conversation with the buyer, ask them questions, understand who they are, where they're coming from. And there's a lot that can be done on both sides to break down those barriers. If you start a conversation, ask questions, you're much more likely to end up buying or selling because you're maybe uncovering the barriers that would stop somebody, for example, price, or like budget, or um, do I even have room for this in my house? Like you can have those conversations and help someone get to the decision point.
That's great advice. I'd love to hear from some others about what you
I would
think.
just like to chime in and say there has never been a better time than this to be a collector. I
Yeah.
mean, during the dark ages, as I was talking about in my early years of the business, if you wanted to find out certain things, you had to really, really search hard. Now you go on your computer and you can travel the world. You can see if you find an artist whose work you like, you put their name in, and next thing you know, you'll find 10 resources that may be offering it. Or you can go into the history, you can search the auction markets. We were building a primary market was one thing, but now the secondary market adds a very rich new layer to it. And to people who are longtime collectors of me now, come to me now and go, Doug, Rago is having a sale, and there's a piece by so-and-so that fascinates me. What do you think? And we've always wanted to be seen as an honest and consultant to people also, that you can come to us for an opinion, but we can go, look, you'll find now you can review 25 years of that artist's work and decide for yourself, is this what you want? How has it evolved? I just think this is one of the most exciting moments, and it's opened it up the world so wide. The downside is, we're hearing, there's been many galleries that are closing. If that's a parallel to if you walk through the retail neighborhoods in New York City, you'll see so many empty storefronts because online shopping in general has become the modern way to approach it. And the old model has got to adapt. You've got to be offering something new. So it's really a challenge to more traditional gallerists such as myself. You stay current, you innovate, or you just become part of history. And we're finding that if we're doing what we've always done, which has been driven by passion, finding work that we love, young emerging talent, and as Suzanne's talking about, little baby birds to hold and to offer and protect while you help them find a platform for their work, that's very gratifying. When we started, there was almost no market. The glass world started in the mid 60s when we were starting in New York. I mean, people were at craft fairs. I would visit the fairs to see, and things were $60, but work it had an inherent value that was striking. And I say, there are people who would appreciate this, who can afford this, who would support it at a different financial level and bring it there. But I repeat, I don't think there's ever been as good a time as this for collectors.
Yeah. And I think too, what you said, Isabel, about, just starting a conversation is important. I think many young collectors don't know you can set up payment plans sometimes with gallerists, or you can talk to an artist and say, I love this piece. Could I pay you over a few months because I just really believe in the work that you do? I think that there are opportunities for people to enter the field if they are just maybe brave enough to ask questions. Okay, there's a bunch of questions in the chat. We're not going to get through all of them. I'm going to give us a hard stop, maybe definitely 1:30 my time. So another 15 minutes for everybody. There's a question for Suzanne about the popularity of certain artists growing and if we think that's sustainable long term. And I think there's a larger question there as well about context, because there was a lot of conversations about contextualizing craft. And I think I would be interested to know, once an artist context changes, does it stay there? Does it shift? Does it change over time? So,
I think it's likely. I think once people start to visualize where an artist fits in the pantheon, it would really take some doing to knock them down a few pegs, especially if they don't get canceled. But I mean, nothing is forever. Everything changed. Everything is cyclical. So when I started in the arts and crafts movement, and it was in the 1980s, and there were 5 or 6 galleries selling arts and crafts in Soho alone. And that was really, it was hot, it was fun, it was vibrant. And now in 2026, while we still hold a few arts and crafts auctions, and we certainly still sell some of the particular components, we don't sell as much, and the prices are just a fraction, except for the really great rare examples, the prices are just a fraction of what they are. So at some point, yes, they were great, and then not. So is Toshiko's market going to, remain where a great piece will bring $500,000 forever? Likely not. But she has certainly gotten a tremendous boost. And also some of the boost has to do with not only the shows. Sometimes people go kind of crazy, and you get in the auction world, as Isobelle will know, you get these insane outlier results, right? People go crazy. They have to have something, and they will spend something that is so much more than they have ever brought before, but people will pay attention. And that does raise everything. It will raise the work of that person. Even though you never get that again, it will ratchet it up. Am I answering your question at all?
absolutely. Yeah. I think that's exactly the answer they were hoping for. I hope, Daniel, if not, to let us know. Does anyone else want to talk about context and what that means?
Well, I spoke about it early on, even in the real estate aspect of what we did. Kenny's real estate is online. We used to be finding it was very significant to be in the right neighborhood at the right time, and to be somewhat prescient about it, to be a bellwether business, to be there before everybody was there. I used the term earlier, adventure. Collectors used to come to us and go, "Oh, Doug, I couldn't imagine why you moved into the meatpacking district until I went home and I told my children, and they said, 'Wow, that is so cool, Dad.'" So that aspect plays into it too. Things have their moments. Markets certainly go up and come down. We've heard from many collectors who go, "Oh my gosh, I bought something 20 years ago at this price, and now in Rago's last auction, it didn't come near that price." What does that mean? And I said, that means markets go up and down. If you bought it to sell, then you should have sold it when it was at a high price. We've never promoted this as an investment in anything other than beauty, passion, and personal pleasure. But we have seen how, values. And today, I'll quote, I forget who said it, but it used to be called the art world. Now all you hear about is the art market. This topic today, of course, is specifically about the market. But when you read about it in the papers, you're not getting deep, insightful critiques from intellectual critics. You're hearing what it brought, what record-bringing price, what Artsy does so well. And that, to me, has never been the crux of it. And I find when we've been approached by people over the years, and it happened repeatedly, saying, "We see something happening here. We're putting together an investment group. What are your numbers? How is it, each year? What is the percentage? We'd like to do this." And I say, "You lost me at the second word there, because I don't even understand what you're talking about. It's like NFTs. What were you buying? To me, it was obvious you weren't buying an artwork. You weren't buying somebody's creative expression. You were buying a concept that's like currency. And that's Yes, there is currency involved, and to stay in business, we have to understand that. But I don't think that's what true makers are about. You know, we have artists who come to make art because it's a calling and they have no option except to make art. And they are intelligent, talented people who could make a living other way, but they just feel compelled to do this. This is who they are and their essence, and they have to express it. So, you know, the market part is inescapable, but I think the passionate part, is so wonderful. And again, right now in the auction world, we advise some collectors to say, look over there, there's some wonderful opportunities.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're talking about the context of trends, and I think that's so important because Kenny, I would say one of the reasons why your work was so successful at the, kind of during the time of COVID, because people were at home, they were starting to do things with their hands. I read some, and I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, some crazy statistic about consumers who consider themselves craft makers in some way. And the idea that that will not influence collecting in the future would be absurd. So like, yes, we have a huge saturation of craft right now with collectors who really were at the height of collecting in the late 80s and early 90s, deacquisitioning right now. So Fred, he has a comment, why are there less artists at the ACC Baltimore? Because you have a saturated market that is proliferated in many different ways. You can buy directly from artists. You can come to a fair. You can go to an auction, a gallery, an online marketplace. I think there's all of that in here and all of it is important. I want to leave us with one last question, and it's going to be like a rapid fire question. And it's something that I think about often, which is what do you think your responsibility is to the craft field in your particular role? So I'm going to go through to everybody. I know it's a hard question, but hopefully one we can answer succinctly.
Well, for me, I
You
think
want to go in a specific? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
it's to continue doing what we've always done, is to try and find and support emerging talent, give them a platform to bring it to a wider audience. And while I don't have the expertise to do it in a way that Kenny does, there is still the old-fashioned route, and we bring it and put it in front of people, and we continue to do that. But part of that is supporting really good work, things you recognize as the best that's out there, not just because somebody is a nice, pleasant person who likes to dabble on the weekend and make, is a weekend wood turner. But, so supporting it emotionally and if you can, financially is very, very important.
Mhm. And Suzanne, your role in auction houses is very much as a custodian, sort of, and steward of work. So, what would you say is your responsibility in the craft field?
My responsibility in the craft field, I would say, is the very same responsibility as offering anything else, and that is to present the works honestly, to have a transparent business, to answer all questions, to try to get ahead of all questions, to be very, very, very thorough and clear about condition issues, to make sure that our clients, who are both the sellers and the buyers, are well taken care of. It is because what we do ultimately, and this is not what this talk is about, but what we do is about people and it's about relationships. I love handling the objects and I love working with art, but I love working with people more. And it is really all, for me, it is by far all about that.
Mm-hmm. Penny, you're next on my screen. Would you like to go next?
Yeah. As a maker that is doing all of the making and marketing and selling, I think that my responsibility to this community is to set fair market pricing, right? And so new artists, very new artists, sometimes, or even really, really successful artists, will either really, really underprice their work, which makes it hard for other artists to price their work at what they believe that they should be getting. And people that are vastly, vastly over pricing their work is also it's kind of doing the opposite. It's like overvaluing the work, which can kind of create people scoffing at work, right? And these price trends ebb and flow like crazy with the market. But the best that I can do is, create accessible stuff for new emerging collectors. And then also offering collections of work for those experienced collectors that maybe want to spend a little bit more money. But for me, I've had so many conversations with other artists that we all have a responsibility to each other as fellow makers to set fair market pricing. And we could have a whole conversation about pricing, but that's kind of where I'll leave it.
And Isobelle?
I'll round us off. Well, Artsy's mission is to expand the art market to support more artists in the world. And our vision is a future where everyone is moved by art every day. And I think it's rare that you work for a company where you feel so aligned with the mission and vision. For me personally, working with galleries, it's my mission to make sure they can have diverse channels to sell through so that they can stay open and therefore support their artists. I know that, not everyone wants to work with a gallery, but I think they do very, very important work for artists so that, they can just make art and not everyone's as multi-talented as Kenny and able to kind of juggle the marketing and everything. So I think it's important. So I help the galleries, they help the artists, and then more people get to make a living as artists and enjoy, more people get to enjoy art. So that's it from my side.
Oh, go
Yes,
ahead, Doug.
Douglas.
Doug has one more word.
I just wanted to add one more thing that we see increasingly as part of our mission. I mentioned earlier, getting work into museums was always part of what we were very anxious to do. And I think now that these collections are coming, oftentimes people, whether they're the heirs of and have inherited this, I say when they go, I want to sell it. Sometimes I go, think of donating it to work with the museums. And I think that that builds a legacy for all time. And that's part of our ongoing mission today is to help transfer things from the private domain into the more public domain.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, and I'm glad that you made it, Doug. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to have all of you here, and I cannot believe 90 people stayed until the very end, even though we went a half hour over. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you to our generous speakers, of course, for their knowledge and their insights about the future of collecting craft. I want to again acknowledge it has been a difficult few weeks for the ACC staff, but as a friend recently reminded me, many courageous and kind acts, small and large, are cause for hope. So we thank our artists who continue to express our shared humanity, our collectors who safeguard these important works, and for all of us here who are doing what we can to support our field and our communities around the world. So thank you all again. I really appreciate it. And it's just such a privilege to have you.